We've come to the final video in the session, and before I jump into the topic, I just want to thank everyone who participated in asking a question this time around. Well, except the YouTube auditor, because he can always go fuck himself. And hopefully, people enjoyed all the videos so far this week. So for the final video, I'm answering all the questions people had about just one topic. This was the most asked question during the session, and you guys are going to see all the people who asked the question and all the different ways that they actually asked it. But essentially, it all comes down to, what do I think about the Ferguson and Staten Island cases of unarmed black men dying from police officers and the subsequent fallout from each one. Now, all of the questions combined touch on the topics. Some asked about the case, some asked about race relations in general, or pretty much anything that goes along the way. Instead of going through these one by one, I might as well just do one long answer that covers all the topics. First of all, the main thing people seem to be getting wrong is there are two issues at hand. Not one, but two. Police enforcement or brutality and race relations. On their own, each is a volatile topic. Police brutality is about the abuse of power, while race relations has a long bad history in this country. On their own, each topic is naturally going to get a response from people. But in the most recent publicized cases, as well as a few others that haven't received national attention, these two issues are meeting up. And when you have two volatile issues converging on a problem, you're bound to get a shitstorm. And yes, this has turned into an absolute shitstorm. It's no stretch to say that people want fair policing from cops and that people should be accepted for who they are, as opposed to being judged or stereotyped for their skin color. I don't think anyone's going to argue against those points. But now that these two topics have met once again, you have irrational people doing irrational shit once again. For those of you who either lived under a rock for a year, or to be fair, if you don't live in the United States, we had two cases of white police officers killing unarmed black suspects. There are some similarities in each case and differences in each case, and for the most part, the protests and the rhetoric has gone on far too long, and it's at the bullshit point. In both cases, neither person should have died, especially in one case in particular. But obviously, when you look back at a situation, you can always say things could have played out differently. There's no question neither person should have died, but obviously looking back, you're able to sit here and say these are the things that could have been done differently, but you weren't actually there. But you can't go back in time and actually change what happened. So, let's start with the Michael Brown case. In Ferguson, Missouri, a black teenager was shot by a white police officer in the middle of the day, unarmed. The incident led to riots shortly thereafter, and then a few months later, when the jury didn't indict the cop, it led to more violent riots. The riots pretty much destroyed parts of the city, businesses, and required the state police to come in and help Ferguson control the population. Here in New York, well, Staten Island, which I don't consider part of New York. No, I'm serious, man. Can we just donate that piece of shit to New Jersey and let them deal with those assholes? Whatever, man. A man was arrested by a few cops, and he was put into a chokehold during the arrest, which resulted in him going into cardiac arrest and dying. For those that don't know, chokeholds have been banned for years by the NYPD, so the officer should have never had his arm around that man's neck in the first place. Now, aside from a black man being killed by a white cop after doing something illegal, these cases have nothing in common. Nothing to do with one another. Yet, both tragedies are being lumped together like a Groupon deal or some shit for people to protest these motherfuckers. Now, when it comes to the Michael Brown case, let's get one thing straight. This kid was not innocent. Not by a long shot. Right before the altercation, he was caught on video pushing a store clerk out of the way and stealing something from the store just using his size alone. So as much as his parents want to say he was innocent, he was a good boy, he did nothing wrong, no, he was a fucking criminal. Petty crime, but if he's willing to commit one basic crime, I'm sure there were plenty of other times he did so or would do so in the future. You don't just walk into a shop and push someone out of the way and take something as your very first crime. Usually kids just run to the store, they grab something, and they run out. This kid walked in, pushed someone out of the way, grabbed something, and walked out of the store like nothing happened. Straight A students don't do that. Honor roll students don't do that. Respectful kids don't do that. This kid was a fucking criminal. I don't want to hear any bullshit that he was never charged with anything, he was never caught with anything. You don't just do that behavior overnight. You don't just all of a sudden say, you know what, I feel like walking into a store, punching a motherfucker, and walking out with some of the merchandise and stealing it just because I can. You don't do that. So when the police were called and the officers stopped him, he was then shot 7 or 8 times, all in the front of his body, and he died from those wounds. Those are the basic fact. But what's occurred since then has so many different variations to the story that you just don't know what's true and what's not true. Some witnesses say he had his hands up and he was surrendering. Some people say he charged the officer, so the cop fired his gun to stop him. Regardless, there's no video, and I sure as hell wasn't there to see what the fuck happened. Now, when the case came to the grand jury, the officer Darren Wilson was not indicted. From that point Ferguson started rioting, tearing down the city they live in, burning things, you name it. It was a horrible display of human stupidity. During the grand jury testimony, the biggest problem was that nobody could get their story correct. The defense team for the police officer had all their witnesses say the same thing. Michael Brown charged the officer, and he was shot after he lunged at the cop. The prosecution's witnesses, though, couldn't get their shit together. His hands were up, his hands were coming up. He was moving to the floor, he was saying don't shoot, he wasn't saying anything. Ultimately, there were too many different stories that the grand jury heard. Now, the prosecution is now saying that the defense's witnesses lied. And you know what? They very well could have lied their ass off on the stand. But that doesn't change the fact that your witnesses all told different stories. If your witnesses were well prepared and actually saw the incident, then there would only be one story, not 5. So when you have 5 different witnesses telling 5 different stories, you see that there are variations as to what may have happened. Yet when the defense puts their 5 witnesses on the stand and all 5 say the same thing, what do you think the grand jury is going to do? They're going to believe the team that has all 5 witnesses saying the exact same thing. Now, my biggest legal issue with this case is how a grand jury works and the decisions that people make. Grand juries decide if there's enough evidence to go to trial. They do not determine guilty or not guilty. But this jury seemed to automatically rule that the cop was not guilty. To me, that's a problem. They're not supposed to look at the evidence and immediately say whether or not somebody is guilty or not guilty. That's not their job. Their job is to determine if the evidence is good enough to at least go to trial. Now, obviously, I wasn't on that jury, but based on the evidence that's been presented so far, even the witnesses not getting their shit together, I personally would have said there's enough evidence to at least go to trial. However, based on the fact that the witnesses couldn't get their shit together at the trial, I could have easily seen this being a not guilty verdict. I think Michael Brown at least deserved his day in court, but I don't think the cop was guilty of murder or manslaughter. Could he have shot him in the arm and legs? Absolutely. Could he have fired less than 12 bullets? Sure. Matter of fact, he should have fired less than 12 fucking bullets. But based on the fact the prosecution's witnesses all told different story and the defense witnesses all told the same story, whether or not they lied is not the jury's problem. That's up to the prosecution to fucking figure out. I don't think Darren Wilson would have been convicted. And even myself, I would have probably voted not guilty. I would have said there's enough evidence to at least go to a trial, but I wouldn't have convicted him based on the evidence that we have right now. The aftermath of this is a whole other story. For starters, what the fuck are the riots gonna do? I mean, why are you destroying property, causing damage to business owners, and ultimately, your tax dollars are gonna end up fixing that shit. Or if you're poor, then basically everyone else's tax dollars gonna fix that shit. Why resort to violence because you disagree with something? It's only gonna be met with a much more forceful response from police and troopers who need to protect those that the rioters might injure. It doesn't help that one of Michael Brown's relatives yells out at a rally, "Burn this bitch down," because now you're just inciting riotism. It was a completely and wholly unnecessary comment to say. Peaceful protests, sure, not a problem. Everyone has that right. But rioting and looting just shows a complete lack of class and human decency for your own damn community. Now, when it comes to the Eric Garner case here in New York, it's a little bit different. Unlike Michael Brown, this whole incident was filmed and there was no need for a witness on this one. Eric Garner was being questioned by cops for selling loose cigarettes. Yes, believe it or not, selling a cigarette for $1 here in New York City is illegal. Oh man, we got fucking laws for everything. Next year they're gonna have laws on which way you're supposed to wipe your ass. But in any event, he was questioned by the cops, it turned angry, and then a few cops tried to arrest him. Eric Garner happens to be a much bigger man than the cops, so one cop decided to put him in a chokehold to take him down to the floor, at which time Eric Garner said he couldn't breathe. After arresting him, the cops didn't give him any medical attention. Some off-duty paramedics didn't attend to him right away, and it wasn't until a few minutes later when he went to cardiac arrest was when they decided to help him. By the time he received the medical attention, he died as a result of that cardiac arrest. Now, the footage was all over the news naturally, and right away, people saw the chokehold, which is illegal from the NYPD's own regulation. They're not allowed to use chokeholds. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide, and this case goes to a grand jury, and the officer was not indicted either. Now, this shit just absolutely baffles me. He clearly had this man in a chokehold, which was banned by the NYPD years and years ago. His death was ruled a homicide due to being forced into cardiac arrest. Yes, he was a big man, probably had health issues, but the medical examiner ruled this a homicide regardless of whatever health issues this man may have had. And you're going to tell me there isn't enough evidence for a fucking trial? Are you kidding me? That asshole cop belongs in jail for murder. It's on tape. Choking a man, not listening to him say he can't breathe, and then you neglect any medical attention afterwards? All this over some loose cigarettes? Come on, man. This is fucking bullshit. You know, unlike the Michael Brown case, where there was no video footage of the actual shooting and conflicting eyewitness accounts, this case has a fucking video, and he was clearly put in a chokehold to be arrested. Come on, man. How the fucking hell does that not go to trial? So naturally, people were pissed again, except here in New York, we don't riot. Number one, we know not to fucking destroy property like those assholes because it doesn't solve anything. But number two, which is more importantly, the NYPD doesn't fuck around. I don't know how many police Ferguson has, but the NYPD has over 40,000 cops, auxiliary police, not to mention the National Guard and government task forces. Simple math. Protesters here would be outnumbered if they decided to start some shit, which is why New Yorkers don't riot. It's not that people just want to be peaceful, it's that they would get their shit stomped in if they decided to do something stupid. Our police department doesn't fucking play games if you're going to decide to destroy property. But in any event, since that happened, New York has had a shitload of these peaceful protests, and by that I mean no rioting. However, there have already been incidents in the aftermath, one of the most recent being the killing of 2 innocent police officers sitting outside on a patrol by some out-of-state asshole who came all the way up here from Maryland. This motherfucker came all the way up from Maryland after killing his girlfriend just to kill 2 police officers, which, by the way, they weren't even white. He was looking to kill 2 white officers, and he ended up killing someone who was Spanish, and the other one was Asian. Some of these protests were chanting shit like, what do we want? Dead cops. What do we want? Policemen shot. So although peaceful is how they like to classify these protests, they weren't exactly peaceful. So let's get that shit right out the way. If you're chanting for dead cops, and you all of a sudden get 2 dead cops, guess what, motherfucker? That's not a peaceful protest. Now, here's my thing. In both these cases, I have no issues with people protesting peacefully. I think in both incidents, the cases should have gone to a trial minimum. Bare minimum. But they didn't. I think the Ferguson shooting would and should have been ruled not guilty, but the NYPD officers should at least be charged with depraved indifference. Murder or manslaughter would never get convicted here in New York City for a police officer, but depraved indifference is where you purposely do not help someone you put in danger, and that easily could have gotten a conviction considering this man put him in a chokehold and didn't help him afterwards. But since that time, people have continued to protest. You know, initial anger, I understand. But 2 to 3 months later, come on, man. It's not going to change the outcome of either case. You're not going to get these cases back on trial since the grand jury already made their decision. So all this bullshit about protesting, stopping traffic, shutting down bridges, rioting has become essentially pointless in the long run. Yes, the decisions were wrong. They were absolutely wrong. But gathering hundreds of people to chant in a busy intersection won't change any of it. Trying to say, oh, we're trying to raise awareness. Oh, shut the fuck up. Because the fact is, this is just gonna happen next year. And what's gonna happen? Another protest? Another riot? Whatever the fuck it is. Cases like this happen all the time. Raising awareness really doesn't do shit. Which, by the way, do these protesters have fucking jobs? I mean, what the fuck? Are you people like professional protesters with nothing to do? I mean, motherfucker, get a damn hobby or some shit, man. You know, I thought those Occupy Wall Street assholes were useless, but these people take the fucking cake, man. Now, what irks me more than anything has been the use of these 2 cases as racial tension items. As I said at the start of the video, there were 2 issues at hand: police brutality and race. In both of these cases, it comes down to police brutality, excessive or unnecessary force used in both cases. However, because of the color of the skin of the victims, it's now turned into a race issue. One of the common terms you hear in these protests is Black Lives Matter, and I can't begin to tell you how much this bullshit pisses me off. Yes, Black Lives Matter. So do Asians, and Caucasians, and Middle Easterns, and Latinos, and any other race, color, creed, and religion in between. This wasn't a fucking race issue, but it's been turned into one. Because the reality is, if the victims were white, there wouldn't be this much outrage. But the issue of police brutality would still exist. If the cops were black or even Latino, there wouldn't be this much outrage. But because the victims were black, it's now a racial issue. Meanwhile, since these shootings, according to the FBI statistics, 67 black people have died across the country, and the suspect was another black person. 48 black people have died across the country, in which the race has not been identified as of yet. But somehow, you don't see Al Sharpton at all these functions now, do you? If Black Lives Matter, why isn't he at those incidents? If Black Lives Matter, why does he not play devil's advocate for when a black person kills someone of another race, that is not black? How come those two cops died and all he said was, oh, this is a tragedy, yet no protests or movements for those two cops? They happen to be minorities too, but they were killed by a black man. Al Sharpton is the biggest fucking hypocrite and attention whore imaginable. If one race matters, then they all matter. If black lives matter, then so does everyone else. If you're going to argue that black lives matter, then why aren't you at every death of a black person with that same exact message? You know why? Because it only suits him when he can turn this into a racially charged issue. The unfortunate statistic that he would never actually admit to is that most murders of black people come at the hands of other black people. Now look, again, this is not a race issue. This is not me being racist or color biased. This is going by national FBI statistics. These deaths are mostly gang violence or in poor neighborhoods, but these statistics are all ignored by Al Sharpton. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are incidents in which race is playing issue, and I'm positive there are times when race plays an issue when it comes to cases like the Trayvon Martin case where he was followed because he was suspicious. Oh God, that fuck. You know, I'm thankful nobody asked me on that shit. Oh God, fucking kid can't even walk down the street without being suspicious. What the fuck, man? I ain't gonna get into that case because that one was total bullshit. But these two cases were police brutality or police mistake cases. They were not race related. It's been unfairly turned into a race case when race should have not been any part of the equation. Unlike the Trayvon Martin case where the kid was suspicious and followed by that one asshole with a gun, these two cases had nothing to do with race. One police officer was responding to a black male who had just robbed a convenience store, and the other one just absolutely did not need to occur, but the guy was put in a chokehold regardless. The incident should have never occurred. We know that. And there are plenty of other race-related cases across the country in which black people are unfairly victimized, but neither case falls into this category. Unfortunately, though, Al Sharpton needs to be relevant, and he turns these into race cases. And the worst part is, the more times that this cocksucker cries wolf, than the times when race actually is a factor, people tune out because he's so full of shit. The more times Al Sharpton decides to pull the race card, the less times people are going to actually tune in and listen to what he says, and basically going to tune out everything he wants to say. There are absolute cases where race is a problem, where race is the actual cause of the criminal act. But with Al Sharpton, anytime a black person is the victim of the crime, it is automatically a race-related issue. Yet when it's a black person causing the crime, you don't see him running around saying Black Lives Matter at all. He is the biggest fucking hypocrite and one of the biggest problems behind these two cases and riots. Bottom line, neither person should have died. Michael Brown and Eric Garner. Neither case is race-related. Rioting because you don't agree with a legal case just shows a lack of human decency, and continuing to protest is not going to change anything that happened. But this is going to be in the news until the next case comes along, because the unfortunate reality is there's always a next case. It always happens, and the cycle will continue again. Al Sharpton will show up, riots will occur, protests will occur, and in the end, nothing will get resolved. Anyways, I made it through an entire question and answer session without politics and religion this time. I think that's a record up in this motherfucker, man. Anyway, hopefully everyone enjoyed all 5 of these videos. As always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit. Next week, going back to all my normal shit, including hipfire commentaries, more Destiny videos, and Call of Duty videos.